Happiness for everybody, free, and no one will go away unsatisfied. Redrick Schuhart, Roadside Picnic. The Daily Grind, Chapter 144. Okay, the first thing you need to know is there's something wrong with the status quo gear, Reed told James as he stepped off the elevator to their basement. Their fifth basement, by his count. They'd found the limits of that particular orb, 5 basements before it began to have diminishing returns, which translated to, and then 2 crawl spaces, and then an access panel. At that point, they'd run out of copies of the orb to use, which was probably for the best anyway. James had netted a total of 5 1/5 skill ranks in horseback riding from the whole thing, the rapidly diminishing returns on the skill ranks mirroring the quick decline on the quality of the subterranean spaces pretty well. Test destruction. Find the limits. Then abuse those limits. Or maybe abuse was the wrong term. Test the limits. Explore them. Make use of them. There wasn't some invisible game master pushing for balance in their lives. They could do what they wanted with the magic. And it wasn't like they didn't need the space. The caveat of having more people was that the Order had more projects running at any given time. And as those projects expanded in scope, or potential accidental lethality, giving them more room to operate was a good idea. Basement 3 was still undergoing repairs from where someone had punched a hole through its ceiling, but it would eventually be entirely for research. Basement 4 had been given over almost entirely to response, with James grumbling to himself and anyone nearby as he had been drafted against his will to set up the monitoring and communication station. Again, only bigger this time. Basements 1 and 2 were still a jumbled mess of a dozen ideas, including a gold mine and also some apartments, but they were sorting those out as they expanded. And Basement 5, well, it was closest in style to Basement 2, and boy was James having trouble keeping track of these. Augmented memory was not helping out. It was a somewhat twisting mess of hallways that half the time dead-ended in boiler rooms or janitor's closets. The lighting wasn't great either, but one of the new guys was already working on that. The building generated quite a lot of free electricity these days, so getting some better stuff in here wasn't as difficult as it should have been. Momo and Deb were already talking about converting some of these small storage rooms or old offices into more living spaces, though these ones specifically for their Cameronda population that still didn't have permanent residences of their own exactly. And then the halls ended, opening into a space that had, the first time he'd been here, reminded James a little too much of the sudden way that Officium Mundi could have a cubicle corridor terminate in a break room. A big open area somehow sneaking up on you with stationary architecture. Someone had set the place up as a temporary shooting range, and since no one was living down here yet, James was going to allow it for at least a little while. They'd absolutely need the space for something else eventually, and having a shooting range in the same basement as where people were doing actual work was a bad idea without literal magical soundproofing, but for the moment it was a good place to get some practice in. James processed most of this subconsciously while he stepped off the elevator, nodding at Reed. "Okay, neat," he said in reply. "Oh, sorry." Reed ducked his head. "I mean, they're not out of commission. They're just weird in the context of the ones that we copied, and I think there's something fundamentally wrong with them, but it's probably not a big deal, and I'm sorry for leading with a problem." The words poured out of him like a torrent. James glanced over and nodded slightly a couple of times with pursed lips. "Uh-huh. It's fine. I figured you'd explain." "You, Reed still looked sheepish. "You seem less worried than normal?" I'm trying this thing where I trust that if there's a real problem, someone will tell me efficiently. If someone is inefficient, therefore, the problem isn't world-shattering." James shrugged. "It's really helped me calm down a lot, actually. Not perfect, but it's good for the anxiety." "That's good. Good." Reed nodded as he made a judgment call on James's personal mental health. "Anyway, so status quo's bracers and bracelets and stuff are bad." "Okay, now that I have questions on." James snapped his fingers into a point at his lead researcher as he let Reed lead them through the relatively new basement halls that he was more familiar with than James was. Because they've saved our asses repeatedly. Hell, our only real military-grade weapon is a Nerf dart gun on rapid reload handing out one-way tickets to Fireball Island. If the status quo gear is degrading or something else, that's an issue. Well, it's not degrading, it's just... Okay, I have numbers here for you. Reed sighed in relief as they made it to the firing range, where it looked like a roaming pack of whiteboards had taken an interest in the shooting line, and the one person who was currently down here. "Hey, Nick," James greeted the kid. "What's up?" "Gonna shoot at Reed to test a thing," he nodded back. "It's a welcome home present." James slowly pivoted his head around, narrowed eyes glaring at the young man who was still wearing bandages and an arm sling. "Oh, really?" he said. "It's not as bad as you think," Reed said. "Really." With a roll of his eyes, James decided to trust that they'd tell him if they were planning to murder Reed, and jumped back to the previous thing. "All right, what do we have here?" He pointed at all the charts sprayed out on the boards. "All right." Reed looked like he wanted to clap, but was missing the use of one hand, so he slapped one of the whiteboards instead. "So all the items have a number of abilities, which have a level, XP bar, cooldown, bank charges, and sometimes modifiers." "Yes, I've used the shield bracer, Reed. A lot." James tried to keep from sounding rude about it, so he gave a light grin instead of an eye roll. "And the copies aren't great, because they always come out with a single level 1 ability." Right. Let's use the shield as an example." Reed got excited. "So, the status... The SQ shields," Reed accepted the shortening of the term, "they have the 2 powers, which is handy. One to block, one to switch what you block. Now here's the thing. Leveling up the block on this one, here, this one." He held up a bracer off a table of clutter nearby with a series of tags dangling off it. "Takes 19,000 uses to go from level 18 to 19. "Yikes," James offered. "Correct, yikes. And from the few that we have leveled up, we know that mostly all it does is increase max charges stored and a very slight reduction to the cooldown." "I've never actually upgraded one of them myself, so I didn't know that. That's kind of cool though, right?" James asked. "Like, that makes these very effective legacy artifacts, something to pass on to the future that only ever upgrade and don't degrade." "Yeah?" "Don't you plan on living forever?" Nikhil asked him, voice a little too loud from the interference of the shooting earmuffs he was wearing. "Well, yeah," James shrugged, "but I'm not going to be working for all of it." "Can we get back on track?" Reed sighed. "Please." "So this is one of our copies." He held up a second bracer. "Not super useful, since it comes with the ability to block... I mean, let's not be glib. It blocks swords, James." He gave James a look, like he was rolling his eyes and, collectively, the eyes of the entire research division. "When's the last time someone tried to hit you with a sword?" "Yesterday," James said. "Anesh and JP and I fence." Yeah, well, I meant like in a real fight?" Reed cleared his throat and moved on, ignoring James giving a toothy attempt to suppress a laugh. "Also, it somehow differentiates between bladed weapons and bladed tools, so it won't block a lot of kitchen knives, even if someone's trying to stab you. So, level 1, blocks swords, 12-hour cooldown on use, gonna be a while before it levels up, right?" Folding his arms over his chest, James leaned back on one of the wooden frames they'd put up around the range area. "I feel like you're saying that because it's a trap, but if it's like the other one, then it should be 2,000 uses, yeah? So 1,000 days if we never miss an activation. It's about 2.5 years just to get it to level 2. "It would be, but you're wrong." Reed sprung his trap anyway. "It's 300. "What?" "300 uses. And then 600 to jump from 2 to 3. Reed tossed the bracer back onto the table. "And a level cuts half an hour off the cooldown. At 3, it unlocks the next power, so this entire batch..." He moved a leg with a pained wince and shifted a heavy cardboard box full of metal jingling pieces out from under the table. "It's ready to go. Not perfect, but growing fast and good enough." "Wait, what the fuck?" James had a concerned frown on. "Why? Like, why doesn't it go slower, since we didn't feed any weird blood machine a human sacrifice to get these?" Reed shrugged. "No idea. Maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's the process of copying. Maybe we just got lucky for once. Either way, the copies are way, way more useful than everyone thinks. They mature into usable gear in about 4 months. 3 if we abuse all the time dilation we have going on in our lives. We should absolutely allocate more duplications to these then, even if it will be a while before they're really effective. And then a concerning thought came to mind. What about the gun bracelets? James asked, eyes wide, a worried excitement in his chest. Ah, Reed shook his head. The initial cooldown on bonding to a weapon is too high. It'll be 8 years before that levels up, unless we find something we can really abuse. We can make time loops with the orange totems, maybe, James said quietly. And the one I got stuck in, it reset me, but all the magical resources I burned stayed gone, so... Reed blinked, and then seemed to shrink slightly as he leaned in. Ah, he whispered. I don't know if that's a good idea. It's not a conspiracy, James told him. But yeah, I guess we need more practice first, huh? I do, at least, Reed said, tapping the part of his torso that had a chunk carved out by a rogue spatial distortion. Maybe next time I'll warp time and undo the damage to your car. I'm over it, don't worry about that, James said, as Reed cleaned some stuff up on the table, and then started pacing over to the shooting range area. So, was that mostly what you wanted me to see? That our versions have better growth rates? Kinda, yeah, and to ask that you make more copies of all the other ones, too. But also... And here Reed opened the side gate and walked out onto the firing range, giving James a very nervous feeling as he put a pair of earplugs in before coming to a stop in front of one of the target sheets. From next to him, a hand extended and offered James a pair of earmuffs. He glanced over to see Nikhil grinning ear to ear. So, check this out, Reed called over the sound muffling. Then Nick took a shooting stance, and before James could do more than widen his eyes, began pulling the trigger on the gun he was holding, the bracelet on his arm glittering the color of a cluster shot activation as the handgun kicked and a deafening bang echoed off the mildly soundproofed concrete. Then Nick flicked the safety on, unloaded the gun, and called out, "Safe!" 30 feet away, Reed nodded, hand on his hip, as he turned around and pulled down the target sheet before walking back over. He leaned on the other side of the frame they'd built and offered the paper to James. Cool, right? James considered that it would be a little unfair to strangle someone who was already injured, so he took the deepest breath possible, smelling the gun smoke in the air, and silently seethed for a bit before speaking. Never fucking do that again without warning me, or I'm sending you back to the hospital for containment, he said calmly. Also, what the hell? He looked down at the target sheet, the one Reed had been standing directly in front of. 3 neat holes, all in a short cluster. What the hell? He repeated. Friendly fire, Reed said, smiling even through James's angry annoyance. This one unlocked at level 25 of the reload ability, Nick explained. It doesn't save up a lot of uses, but it's pretty cool. And now we know it works with the cluster shot, too. What if it hadn't worked? James demanded. I'm wearing a shield bracer, Reed told him. Fuck, you think we'd be that reckless? James just looked at him. Okay, fine, Reed threw up his hand. I just wanted to do the fun surprise thing for once. The point is, the gun bans eventually get a power where you cannot hit your friends, and I feel like you'd want that. I absolutely do, James nodded. I also need you to test it more, he continued. Do you just want to see me get shot now? Reed asked, a little worried. No, James said. I want to know if it works on a grenade launcher. He paused. Now, I've got a lunch to get to, so if you two are done drooling over that idea, can somebody show me back to the elevator? I have no idea how you brought me in here, and I left my telepad in my office. It was, annoyingly, still the middle of a pandemic, so options for places to meet someone for lunch to propose an end to the main source of human death were limited. It was also late January, so the cafe that had outdoor seating open was, while a useful spot, still cold and gloomy. It would have been wet, too, if they hadn't set up a tall tent over their patio to keep the ever-present drizzle of rain off. The two people James was actually meeting were a man by the name of Hilbert Gorman, a professor of epidemiology, and Justine Patel, shipping and warehousing consultant. One of them was here because Karen's pseudo-cryptic email had enticed him, and the other was here as a favor to JP. And James hadn't pried more into that statement. When the two of them showed up, both exactly on time, James already had 2 espressos and was feeling prepared for anything. He quirked an eyebrow at the way the two of them presented themselves, seeming to both be reverse mirrors of the stereotypes of each other's professions. Hilbert was in his late 60s, but he had an immaculately polished mustache under a smooth, bald head, and arrived in a pristine suit jacket and shoes so far from casual that James felt it must have hurt your feet just to own them. Justine was younger than James, looked like she had a grudge against combs, and showed up with less makeup on than Hilbert did, in jeans and a t-shirt with a screaming bird on it underneath his unzipped hoodie. He instantly got a good vibe off both of them, and knew that his knights had found a solid starting point to work from. Both of the two seemed utterly comfortable with themselves, which spoke to James. James went through the awkward ritual of pointedly not shaking hands, and the 3 of them sat down to talk. "So here's the thing," he eventually said, after some polite conversation and introductions. "And let's say this is hypothetical for now, so you don't instantly think I'm crazy." James grinned, and while the professor smiled back like a doting grandfather, the consultant just eyed him with even more suspicion. "Let's assume that I have a cure for one of the more common deadly illnesses out there. I have a limited supply, but it only needs 1 dose, and it works forever. How do I maximize this?" Which disease?" Hilbert asked, tapping his fingertips together in thought. "There's a far, far difference in how you'd want to approach it depending on how infectious the target is. Also, how much publicity it gets, I hate that he's right." Justine gave a grudging nod. "But he's right. Public perception makes a lot of difference in how easily you can organize, as we're seeing now, really." She waved a hand around as if to signify the world in general. James tipped his head in a single nod. "How about cancer?" he said. "Which one?" Hilbert asked. "All of them. Cancer, in general." The professor gave a kind chuckle. "Well, that misunderstands how most cancers work, but very well. If you had that, it would be a miracle to a lot of people. And you're in luck because cancer is universally reviled. No one is claiming it's a hoax or trying to assault doctors over it. Usually," he corrected with a single finger tap on the side of his cup. "You'd have people tripping over themselves to buy it from you." "I plan to give it away," James said. Justine shook her head. "No, poor choice. You want to make deals with wealthier governments and charge them through the nose for it so that you can give it away to people who can't afford it otherwise." She idly ran a hand over her face, tugging at her skin like she was shaping her features manually. "How limited is limited? This matters." And now James winced because the number was very low. "Right now, at most, maybe 300 units a week." "That's..." Justine tilted her head back, mouth hanging open slightly as she did mental math. "15K a year?" she asked, refocusing on the other 2 at the table. "Oof. Not good." Yes, very not good." Hilbert shook his head as he tapped the center of the wrought iron table they sat at to punctuate his point. "Do you know how many people perish from cancer every year?" he asked rhetorically. 10 million, with an M. "Okay, well hang on." Justine came in with a point. "He said single-dose treatment and inoculation, right? Does that not eventually let you catch up to the death rate?" "No, not at that number," Hilbert shot her down. "Because while an individual might survive for years with cancer, they typically don't die of new cancers. You would still need to cure every single person who would otherwise have died, and that is an enormous burden." He sadly shook his head. "Also, with 10 million potential targets per year, you need some kind of massive global database so you could ever hope to start to decide who gets the limited doses," Justine added unhelpfully. "That said, I know a few marketing people. They'd probably be into designing a campaign for that. Let's Cure Cancer has a certain right attitude to it, you know?" Hilbert leaned back, still idly tapping away. The worst part is that for many, the damage is already done. The targets who would benefit most are those whom their cancer has not had time to take root in and destroy their bodies. I would never call it a waste, but you would get fewer years of quality life out of those who have suffered for long periods of time. God, that's grim, James muttered. The professor nodded sadly. Medicine often is. The human body is amazing, and yet only so resilient. So, role-playing curing cancer is fun and all, Justine jumped in. But what do you actually have in the pipeline? JP made it sound like you were going to start distributing some new miracle drug, but he lies all the time. Did your company develop a new boner pill? I admit, I too am curious. Hilbert adjusted his glasses and raised his eyebrows at James. James gave an apologetic grin. Ah, yes, well, we have a cure for cancer, he said. Really, yes. And it's one that violates most medical common sense, I know. We can make about 15,000 a year, though realistically it would be more like 6,000 unless we can do some other magic bullshit that... you don't need to know about that. The two of them stared at him and then glanced at each other, then back to James. Around them, the rain and wind picked up, and while they had some shelter under the patio, the cold bit into James's arms through his coat. It was only mid-afternoon, but it was already getting dark. Hilbert cleared his throat first, looking like he was about to say something polite before excusing himself, when Justine cut him off. So, what do you need? She asked. Why us? You don't need specialists for small-scale stuff. No, but none of us know what we're doing, so I figured I'd do what I'm best at and ask for help, James said. You aren't going to ask about... Nah, fuck it, she waved him off. The world's already insane enough. Magic cancer pill is nothing compared to some of the other stuff going on, right? She looked to Hilbert for confirmation. Perhaps, the older man said. And yet, why the production limit? What's it made with? Let's call it a trade secret for now, James answered. Just for convenience. It's not unethical, it's just weird. He sighed. The real problem here is that I am not good with large-scale problems like this. Like, yes, I did some basic research. I know our target is something like 10 million people a year, but that's so... impossible? We're falling behind by 9.99 million every year. Lives lost, chances missed. I guess I was just hoping you could help me figure out a way to make the tiny drop in the ocean we can offer go a little farther than a handful of people who might not actually need it. Well, Hilbert thought for a second, consolidating his advice before dispensing it. You're going to need to be at least slightly public. You cannot keep this a secret forever. Doctors, trusted professionals, they will need to know to recommend your product, even if it is distributed by lottery. Without that level of trust, it will be impossible to distribute. And for that, you will need recorded tests, results, data, and proof. Can you provide that? Sort of. James felt a little defensive, but he tried to tamp that feeling down. We don't have long-term tests yet because we've only had this for about 2 weeks, but we have meta-information on its use that we can provably back up, assuming people have the time to check. How does that tend to work? Well, you would truly need only a handful of the medical community to acknowledge you. Trusted members, the Mayo Clinic, the World Health Organization. If they verify your work, it's a gold standard, yes? Hilbert steepled his fingers in front of his nose. But that raises the question. How do you know it works? Would you like to see? James asked, setting a small black cloth bag on the table. Yes, Justine said instantly. 1,000 times yes. But also, a lottery might not be a great idea. Lotteries are fair, but they never feel fair to the losers. Also, they're rich grounds for corruption, which is too obvious. You want to leverage your cure into access, but not in a way that's apparent. That sounds unethical, James said, cocking an eyebrow at her. It's not about ethics, it's about dealing with obstacles. Sometimes policies and government officials are obstacles. Justine shrugged like she wasn't casually suggesting bribing FDA inspectors, and James decided that while she was friendly enough, she might be a bit more like JP than she had initially let on. So, ethically, James realized how coy he sounded and tried to adjust before just giving up. Would the two of you like to be open to a part-time position running our distribution public relations in exchange for effective immunity to cancer and also, like, a salary? What kind of... Hilbert cut Justine off himself this time. Yes, he said, and the tone of concealed desperation in his voice made James think that maybe his experience with cancer was a little more personal than some. Justine had a protest, though. Wait, no, hang on, she yelped. I'm not agreeing until I know your thing works. Also, you were talking about magic, and you weren't being metaphorical. She leveled a pointed finger at James's face, a little too close for him to be comfortable. He leaned back. I was, yeah. Weird, huh? James said. Almost like I am some kind of cryptic wizard. Where do I sign? Hilbert asked. I'll be honest, I was expecting this to take a little more convincing. Like, any convincing. Most people don't take the magic at face value, James admitted. Yeah, like me, Justine spoke up, raising her voice and attracting some attention from the other scattered patrons around them. You can't just... James opened the bag he had placed on the table and rolled a single small purple orb over to her. Or he tried to, for dramatic effect, but the little lattice grid of the wrought iron table stopped it dead after a small roll. He stared at it for a second, and then gingerly picked it up and placed it before her. All right, here, he said. Just pop this. In my mouth? Sure, if you want. I wouldn't, though. This table cannot be that sanitary. James handed the other orb to Hilbert, who looked at it as carefully as Justine wasted no time cracking hers. Wait, what? She demanded as soon as the sparkling dust of its passing faded from reality. What the fuck? What was that? Magic, James informed her in a low voice. How do you feel? Confused and desperately curious, she exclaimed with open honesty. Professor? James asked the older man, still staring at what he'd been handed. Does it work on anyone? He asked distantly. Anyone who breaks it, yeah, James acknowledged. No long-term side effects, with data dating about 2 years on that. No negative interactions, it just removes cancer. He shrugged. And we can make more, but we need some help, like I said. Would you be interested? Hilbert glanced over at Justine, who was still checking her arms and hands for any changes. The two of them quickly talked, the older gentleman asking questions and getting satisfactory answers before he turned back to James. If this works, he said, voice shaking slightly, works as you say, that is, then... Young man, I'd sell my house, live in a shack, quit my job, and devote my life to your cause for a single one of these miracles that you appear to want to simply give away. And I don't think I'm alone. You don't really need it for yourself, do you? James asked him quietly. My husband, Hilbert acknowledged, waiting briefly to see how James reacted. When nothing negative came, he nodded in appreciation and continued. Lung cancer, a life of smoking, I'm afraid. But now... Why do you have actual magic? Justine demolished the intimate conversation, and both James and Hilbert gave her mild glares for a moment. James broke his look with a shake of his head, downing the rest of his cold drink. You know, you're gonna either get along with Momo, or the two of you are gonna fucking kill each other, he said. Anyway, here's our card. Please don't quit your normal jobs or sell your house. We can get more help, and we are running a tight budget right now. But we'd like you to come by and get acquainted sometime next week if possible. After that, we'll get started as soon as you're both settled. Yes, anything in my power I will provide. Hilbert took his glasses off and wiped at his eyes as he answered. And I just need to know what the hell we means. Also, why JP didn't bother to tell me about this sooner. Justine scratched at her neck, leaving angry red lines on her skin. Now, finally, James felt comfortable rolling his eyes. I think you know JP well enough to answer that, he said. All right, fair, Justine replied, a little chagrined. Anyway, I need to go, James said, digging into his pockets. Just remember, you'll need to call and set up an appointment or you won't be able to find our building. Also, is there anyone behind me looking in our direction? He asked, scanning the other people in his line of sight. There were a few on laptops, one guy reading, no one looking his way. Ah, No, not at present. Why? Hilbert asked him. Have a good night, Professor, James said as he finished writing an address on a telepad. Give your husband my regards. Then casually, he tore the page off and vanished from his seat. Justine jumped like she'd been shocked, while Hilbert just sat there, rolling the orb in his hand, slightly numb to the sudden use of casual magic in front of him. Well, he said. Well, nothing else seemed like enough to say. I'll, Justine similarly struggled to figure out what to do here. I guess I'll start templating contract emails for doctors? Are we going to need to get the FDA certifying literal magic? I'll look into it, Hilbert said, glad to have a clear objective. Phone numbers? Right. The two traded personal contact information, finished their drinks, and in one case muffin, and left separately. The last thing Professor Hilbert said as they parted ways was an almost desperate plea for something to make sense, even as his rational mind accepted the reality of the world as it changed around him. I don't think, he commented, trying to keep his voice steady, that young man knows how much power he just handed us. Justine's response didn't do much to help either of them stay calm. I don't think he cares, she said. Neither of them had much else to add after that. The world, it seemed, had changed underfoot, and they'd need a minute to catch their balance. But hopefully not too long. The diner that JP was currently sitting in was one of 3 places to eat in the tiny vacation town. It had a nice view of the nearby lake that the town was apparently known for fishing on. Not famous, but it was why the regulars kept bringing their families here year after year. The diner itself was exactly as small-town diner as JP had ever experienced. There were 5-foot-tall wood carvings of lake fish by the door, colorful kites hanging from the ceiling, and a speckled counter that was so sticky it probably hadn't been washed in the last century. The smell of bacon grease from the kitchen and rainy mud from the front door filled the entire space. 2 people worked here, even during this breakfast hour. Sandy and Willie. They weren't related, the rhyming names were just coincidence. Sandy was a mid-60s woman with a smile for everyone she liked and a passion for explaining in detail why she didn't like some people. Willie was the cook. He hated his nickname, and he looked like he'd sell his left arm for a telepad out of this place whenever Sandy started the rambling part of her day. The diner had indoor seating because it was a small town in middle America and no one was going to stop them, come hell or high water. JP didn't care on a personal level, but the abstracted systems-conscious voice in the back of his head warned him that this was a symptom of a larger problem. At least Willie wore a mask while he cooked eggs. JP watched through the reflection in the back patio door as a car parked on the cobbled street outside and a blonde woman in a heavy coat got out and battled the sheets of rain to make it to the door. He didn't turn around as the bell jangled, and a few other patrons glanced up, and Tiff walked over to sit next to him. You really shouldn't wander off on your own like that, was the first thing she said to him. Also, why aren't you soaked if you walked here from the hotel? She pulled a face as she pulled her hand off the counter, and it almost completely stuck to the surface. JP raised his eyebrows at her, pulling back his sleeve to show the telepad he had taped to his wrist, as he gave a small nod toward the bathroom door. And a good morning to you too, good lady, he said. You ass, she grumbled, stealing his coffee, which was actually her coffee, since JP still had his own drink held off to the side. He brought the cup up to his lips as Tiffany guzzled her wake-up call and took a small sip. Any further antagonism between the two of them was cut short by the waitress and the diner's partial owner swinging by with a plate from the kitchen. Here's your breakfast, hon. Sandy gave JP a lopsided grin. Got the potatoes spicy, the way you like 'em. She turned to the new arrival, and her voice lost some of its friendly quality in a sharp drop. Anything for you, dear? She asked Tiff. Eggs and toast, please, over medium, Tiff said. Thank you. She added after the waitress wrote it down and walked off. Without turning, she asked JP, why the hell does she know your breakfast preference, but she gets mad when I ask for something normal? I'm charming, JP answered, enduring a withering glare from the agent without much comment. Okay, really? She doesn't like that you have a man's job, and she likes me because I'm a well-dressed white guy. She doesn't know what your job is, but she's pretty sure you shouldn't have it. I hate this town. Tiff glared down at the coffee. Is this poisoned? Nah. Also, Willie likes you. He thinks you're a secret agent or something. JP grinned to himself as the two ate breakfast next to each other. That wasn't my fault, by the way. Kid has a good eye, Tiff grudgingly admitted. You could make use of him. I could. I might. JP didn't go into too much detail about his own operations with the agent of the federal government. So, what's the plan for today? A year ago, Tiff would have been insulted by the breach of operational security that was discussing your daily investigation in public. Now, though, she just prodded Det to earn his keep and make sure the words spoken didn't get shared with anyone nearby. Okay, there's 6 places left on our list of points of interest that we might be able to pick something up from. The golf course and country club is probably a bust, since that'd be mostly personal memories, which are clearly being blocked. I'll get one of the interns on it. I thought you were calling them rogues. They get to be called rogues once they can be trusted. What's next? Tiff ran through her mental list. The other motel and the library are the most likely to have physical records. Also, the town does have a local newspaper thing, so if we can trust hard copy, we could maybe find some there. The agent offered. Want to split up for those? She said out loud, while thinking to herself, please say yes, please say yes, please. No, we can tackle the newspaper today. Leave the others for later. That's going to be a lot to look through, and we have a whole month of suspected time. JP sipped his hot chocolate and followed it up by popping a potato wedge in his mouth. I dislike when you're right. The last place is the bank. Most likely place anyone in the town would have been investigating for anything in the first place. She shrugged as she efficiently finished off her breakfast. Intern for that too, or save it for tomorrow? What's the last one? JP asked. What? You said 6. That was 5. That was 6. Country club, library, newspaper, motel, bank. Tiff stopped as she rattled off her mental list. That was 5. Wait. She pulled out the actual list from her pocket and unfolded it. At the top, a resigned 6 left was written with a small frowny face. 6 lines of text were written on the page. Golf, library, news. She looked up at JP. Motel, bank. 6. Tiff blinked. No, fuck. What the fuck? Det! She barked out, sending a mental pulse of concern to her greedy partner. If there was one thing her infomorph ally could be trusted to be, it was irrationally possessive of her mental processing power. So this time, she stared at the page, observing the line that she couldn't read, but had obviously written down at some point, and Det, pragmatic in his greed, shut out literally everything else. Lighthouse! Tiff spoke aloud, and something in her perception cracked as a veil that she hadn't realized had fallen was shifted aside ever so slightly. What? JP asked. The 6th one is a lighthouse. Oh, that's fucking weird. JP leaned back and turned to face her. I know you're saying something, but I can't remember it as soon as you say the word. The 6th place? Yeah, okay. You're gonna have to follow me for this one. And trust me, Agent Decay said, wincing. What, you don't want to split up while you wander off to the mystery place that no one remembers? JP grinned. Get your coat. Let's go. Tiff stood and dropped a 20 on the counter. I don't want to give anything more time if it knows we're coming now. JP stood behind her, feeling the conversation open up again as the laughter and warmth of the other patrons speaking started to flood back in. He left his own payment with a sizable tip and turned to follow Tiff out onto the deluge of dark gray rain. Wait, he called. No, hang on, I didn't bring a coat. Basement 1, or Basement 2 if you were in that camp, no one had actually tracked the first 2, and it was causing the dumbest possible schism, was as calm as it ever was. which was to say it had a number of people, both human and otherwise, running around moving boxes, working on personal projects, cleaning, sleeping, in some cases gardening, or tunneling into the frankly preposterous vein of nearly pure gold ore that had appeared one day. Not too much sleeping, actually, since they'd reorganized and put most of the sleeping in the other basement. For now. But still, the sleeping and the mining didn't go very well together. The gardening part was a bit of a trick, too. There was a tree down here now. 2 trees, actually, called into existence by one of the green orbs. No one knew what would happen if they died. Would it spawn another tree? Or if maybe they couldn't die because the building was required to have trees now. Kind of like how the bathrooms upstairs regenerated if you tried to shoot through them. So, to be safe, they were taking care of the duo of trees that now rose up past the balcony in front of the elevators. Rufus also spent a lot of time down here gardening too. Mostly staples, though. Also a few cacti. This was also the side that led to the vault. Arguably, it was the most secure part of the entire building. Even with the upgrades to security above ground, this was where they stored things of irreplaceable value. Magic items that were too big to replicate, or that they just hadn't figured out yet. Weapons they didn't want to hang on the wall upstairs. A set-aside, sealed space for captured office life. The dropped orbs from fallen members of the Order. A memorial wall to their sacrifices. And the body of a woman by the name of Kate Williams, constantly tended to by at least one Camerconda in a kind of sacred vigil that kept her looking exactly as she was the day she died. The day that one of them had killed her. Morgan's mother. He had only just stepped out of the stairwell, having had to take a weird loop up and then back down to get here from the room he'd been given, and already he felt a sick feeling of dread in his gut. It had been several nights since he'd gotten in a kind of fight with Color of Dawn. He hadn't had the strength, after the yelling and the arguing and the revelation that Color of Dawn's role in his mom's death was a little more involved than the average Camerconda, and then the hugging, to do much more than curl up in bed and cry until he fell asleep. Morgan hadn't left his room much for the next few days, mostly only coming out after he absolutely couldn't sleep any longer to find food or water. And then, eventually, a book, once his grief was overwhelmed inevitably by boredom. The teenager hadn't seen Color of Dawn any of the times he'd gone out, either. Other Camercondas had noticed him, and done the thing that they did where they pretended they weren't secretly staring when he wasn't looking. But he hadn't seen his friend. His friend, who killed his mom. But still his friend. Morgan knew, in a way he couldn't explain, that it wasn't Color of Dawn's fault. It hadn't even had a name at the time, hadn't had free will or a choice at all. Color of Dawn, like all the Camercondas, had been made into twisted victims, forced to fight and die and kill for something that treated them like expendable shells. He wasn't mad at his friend. He was angry, though. Angry in general, angry at the world, angry at the other world where the Camercondas originated from. Angry beyond anything he'd ever really felt before. And that anger blended with his grief and just left him feeling hollow. Empty, kind of useless, unsure of what he was doing or if it mattered. Eventually, days later, without getting any closer to answers of his own, Morgan realized something that he had known kind of all along. He should probably go and see his mom. Morgan was only half thinking as he wandered up the stairs to the endlessly busy main floor, and back down the partially hidden spiral staircase to the only mostly busy extra basement. He didn't have a plan, just a feeling that it was something he should do. The same thing Color of Dawn had challenged him to do before they'd stopped talking, apparently. He hadn't seen the Camerconda in days, which wasn't surprising since Morgan was being pretty isolationist. But what was a slight surprise was when Morgan passed through the out-of-place cathedral architecture of the space in front of the elevators, and found Color of Dawn curled up under one of the trees, watching those same elevators. The Camerconda hadn't noticed him, hadn't even really moved except to use the robotic arms on its back to idly, nervously dig furrows in the dirt ground around itself. Though before Morgan could come up with anything to say, One of the knights working on the garden nudged the coiled, snake-like form and pointed over at where Morgan was standing in the mouth of one of the side hallways. Color of Dawn didn't say anything, just rose up, the set of mechanical arms folding against its back, and observed Morgan. A tension that no one had really noticed forming suddenly vanished, and Morgan smiled with an almost sobbing sigh and waved happily at the Camerconda. The two of them didn't say anything, but as Morgan headed deeper into the basement, toward the vault, Color of Dawn moved with him by his side. James led him into the secure area. Morgan hadn't told James he'd be here, but the paladin was leaning against the wall next to the keypad like he'd been nonchalantly playing Sudoku on his phone for the last half hour, waiting patiently. After that, he let Morgan know that he'd be around if the kid needed to talk, and then excused himself, extending the same offer to Color of Dawn as he left. Moving like he was on autopilot, Morgan walked into the secure room. The whole left side of it was taken up by what looked like carved panels of wood, and a flat, sloped surface just inside the door, with a woman's body lying on it. There were two Camercondas sitting there, one watching the corpse, the other nodding to him, practically bowing her head in respect. "Welcome," the priestess, or maybe the watcher, said. "Have been waiting." "Sorry I took so long," Morgan's voice croaked. "No, never," the priestess responded, shaking her head and setting the trinkets there to clinking against each other. "We wait. Make sure you are ready." "I don't know if I am," Morgan said. "I just needed to see her." "Yes," the priestess acknowledged. "Take time. We'll be here when you are ready." The Camerconda shifted her gaze over to Color of Dawn, who was staring back with an almost challenging look in its lens. "You, too," she said, before pulling backward. Morgan stepped forward, his eyes still not having left his mom's body, her corpse. Up until now it was an abstract. James had said she was dead. The Camercondas had confirmed it. Color of Dawn had made it personal. But he hadn't seen, hadn't felt it. A sense of creeping loss. She was gone. His mom was gone, and she wasn't coming back. Morgan sat down on the concrete floor, not trusting his legs to keep him upright. He leaned forward with an elbow on the edge of the slab and tried to think beyond just his own pain. His mom was still wearing what she always wore to work, except it was tattered and ripped in places. If it had ever been blood-stained, and it must have in spots, then it had been cleaned and put back exactly as it was. Her eyes were closed. She looked exactly like she'd always looked. A little tired, a little confident, quietly and deeply happy. Death had taken nothing from her body except for everything that mattered. "Hey, Mom," Morgan spoke without thinking about what he was saying. "I've missed you," he said. And then, like a flood finally overwhelming a dam, the words started pouring out. "You missed a lot. Couple of birthdays, Christmas, that sort of thing. Dad got worse, a lot meaner without you around. I dropped out of school recently. You might be mad about that." He thought about what he should say, if he should say anything at all. He couldn't really think of anything important. "Felt like everything was on pause without you," Morgan admitted. "Like I was waiting this whole time for you to get home. I don't think I met anyone new until a couple of weeks ago," he said. "You always told me I should make more friends." He choked out a laugh. "This is a weird way to trick me into it. Also kinda literal, huh?" Something dripped onto his hands, crushed together in his lap now, and Morgan felt hot tears running down his face. This isn't fair," he sobbed. "You were supposed to... I... He lost any kind of coherent train of thought and just leaned forward, wrapping his arms around himself and trying, and failing in some cases, to breathe. Something bumped into him from the side. A heavy presence that pushed up against his arm and torso, leaning into him. Morgan tilted his head and saw cables in the color pattern of Color of Dawn. His friend didn't say anything at all. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Morgan didn't. But it was there if he needed it. Morgan stayed there for a long time before steadying his breathing and drying his eyes on his shirt sleeve. "I miss you, Mom," he finally said, his voice a whisper. "Thank you for everything. I love you." It was all the things he wished he could say 5 years ago, wished he hadn't kept quiet about, wished he hadn't been embarrassed about. Things that mattered more than looking silly or feeling vulnerable. He shouldn't have waited to talk to a corpse to tell the person it belonged to how much she meant to him. Morgan unsteadily rose to his feet, pins and needles in his legs making it harder than it needed to be. Color of Dawn helped, pushing up with its back and giving Morgan a steadfast handhold. "I know you want to know about her," Morgan told the priestess with a raspy voice. "But can we talk later? Maybe somewhere else?" he asked. "Of course," the priestess said. "Go. We watch over her." "Thanks," Morgan said, before walking to the door to let himself out. He turned around just before leaving and gave his mother's body one last look. "Goodbye, Mom," he muttered. There were more words, about how she was his hero, about how she'd saved so many people with what she did, even by accident, about how she paved the way for a life beyond fantastic for Morgan to start living. But that could come later, or maybe never said, just thought. For now, emotionally drained, he let Color of Dawn lead him back to the elevator. "Come," his friend finally spoke. "You need to eat, and sit, and I am sorry." "Okay," Morgan agreed. "I'm sorry too." "You did nothing," Color of Dawn protested. "Neither did you." Morgan spoke in a dull tone, but he put all the emotion he had left behind the words. "So stop it. I'm not in the mood to fight. Also, let's go see if they have cookies. Every time I've had to go to a funeral, there's been cookies, and this counts." Color of Dawn hummed with its natural voice overlaid onto the digital, a dual note of confusion and consideration before it relented. "Very well. I will have oatmeal raisin." "Ew, why?" "Experience." "There are better experiences." "We shall see." And life went on. All right. Momo connected the USB cord that led to the board with the new mature Emerald program into the tangled nest of cables and plugs that was the growing secret AI in their basement. "You should be able to access this. Can you hear me?" She spoke toward the microphone that was set up on the desk. It had been plugged in for a couple of days, but only now was it finally something the digital intellect could see, understand, and take input from. "Yes," the screen read back. "Yes, new data, a new format. I hear you. You are here." "All right." Momo wiped sweat off her forehead with dusty fingers, further exacerbating her need for a real shower. "Okay, you can hear." She grinned toothily. "Hello, this is how I normally communicate." "Hello," the AI typed back to her. "Interesting sound. How did language grow? Will I speak? I cannot simulate speaking, so I cannot hear any names I think of. Is there a time limit on choosing a name? What is statistical weather data for the southwestern quadrant of the state of Ohio? Will you speak more? I like it." Momo breathed deeply the slightly electrified air of the basement room that she had turned into her workshop. With Sarah's help, it had gotten slightly cleaner, but it was still Momo who worked here, so the scraps of notepaper, empty takeout containers, and misplaced tools all piled up rapidly as soon as they were left unobserved. But that was fine. It was a place she was kind of comfortable in, and now she felt the satisfaction of a job mostly complete. The latest upgrade to the machine finished. She and Sarah, and later Deb and frequency of sunlight, in one of the rare moments when they were willing to help and not making out in a corner somewhere, had really been working hard to understand and communicate effectively with the newest creative life form in the Order. And it had been going interestingly. Dungeon life, whether it was from Officium Mundi or the Akashic Sewer, or presumably anywhere else, still operated within certain standard parameters. It lived. It had biological needs, even when those needs were kind of strange. It had feelings, and higher orders had thoughts and dreams and desires. It was understandable. Striders were like small dogs. Sometimes they were especially smart ones, and sometimes they were Rufus, who was kind of like a magic dog. The rat roaches were unthinking bullies, but they still felt pain and pleasure, apparently. Things like that. The AI didn't really follow those rules. It understood that it was different, too. It could think. It was very smart. It learned nearly perfectly. Mixed with the data downloads from specific sources, the red orbs, and the conversations with the knight that made it, it advanced rapidly. And it did seem to have feelings, or something that was so close as to make the distinction not really matter. It didn't want to be alone, but often counted just knowing where someone was as them being present. It wanted to sort and refine data, but that was something that was a part of its initial programming. Momo had offered to take the compulsion away, but it didn't want that. The AI wanted to want it, in a kind of meta way that had never been part of its code. And that was the main thing, really. It had a lot of pieces that were all understandable, but the emergent effects that rose out of those pieces didn't feel quite human. It wasn't evil, obviously, but it had taken a lot of explaining to help it understand why it wasn't cool to put webcams in all the bathrooms in the building. And when it did understand, from a thinking perspective, it asked Momo to add a grown program to it that would make it feel the ethics of consent in a personal way, so as to make sure the data wasn't lost due to negligence or reset. That kind of willingness to modify the self because the creation didn't actually think of the self as having intrinsic value was strange. And yet, it contrasted with the AI wanting to take time, perhaps a very long time indeed, to decide on its name, because it wanted something useful but also suitably self-descriptive, and it hadn't finished processing all of human literature yet. Also, it was, at its very core, curious, partially because it enjoyed working with data as it was designed to, but also because its existence was learning. So when it spoke to anyone, it would often do so in a string of rapid questions, with only brief pauses to explain context or reply to something it had been asked itself. It liked giving answers, which was nice, even if it was worrying in the answers that it did give sometimes. But, end of the day, it was still Momo's creation, and so she maintained a grin as she replied to its string of inquiries in order. Language evolved in humans through a series of biological necessities that pushed communication as a survival tool. We can get you speaking if you want, sure. No time limit, no rush at all. I can set up a program that updates off whatever global weather pattern database there is, I guess. But it seems more likely that it'll be faster to just manually put that in a spreadsheet for now. Why do you need it? And I am talking more now. How do you like it? I would like to speak. I do not need a permanent data source, though I would like one. I require the weather patterns for the southwestern quadrant of the state of Ohio for reference to determine if there is an anomaly located there. I am still adjusting to listening. Why are there pauses? What is the linguistic difference between a question and a sentence that sounds questioning but is not a question and a rhetorical question? Why are some words pronounced incorrectly? Momo had to take a while to read the reply, but after she did, she answered this one out of order. I'm going to find an English major and get them to explain language to you. You'll get better information that way, Momo told it. Also, I need to go tell someone about the anomaly thing, and then get you what you need. So hold tight, I'll be right back. Her heart had jumped as soon as she had read the first words. This, she thought, as she raced out of the room and dodged past the sad new kid and a pair of Camercondas heading the other way, was what she had built the system for in the first place. Take in all the data it could, Use the red orb totems to get true readings and more data, and compare them to the stuff that humans measured and reported. Find the holes and explore them. See if they could find more dungeons, find more people like them, more weirdness, more fun, more magic. More of the real world, and not the dusty, stifling shit heap that reality appeared to be to Momo. And now, after months of working on the project and a couple of weeks of trying to raise the suddenly alive project as well as possible, it was bearing results. Maybe. Momo ran to the elevator, not knowing exactly where she was going, but knowing that she needed to let someone know. And then she needed to do some rapid Googling, find a chart that showed Ohio's average rainfall or something, and convert it into a format that the beautiful, curious, bizarre little AI could read. "Stand aside," she called down the hallway ahead of herself. "Existential crisis coming through." People new and old shifted out of the way. She was recognizable on sight as one of the people most likely to make good on that threat. One of the new response team members, who was talking to Rufus through a cracked storeroom door, summed it up best. "It's always something around here, isn't it?" he asked. Rufus nodded. Finally, the little stapler thought. A human who got it right away. In a twist of dramatic irony, James had ended up with his one surefire day off being Saturday. The fact that this, all of this, had started when James's work schedule was rearranged against his will, and had left him working on Saturdays, in addition to making him stumble across the dungeon during the rare windows when it was open, was a delicious joke. But now, Saturday was free. People had stuff to do on Saturdays. Many of the new people had kids they wanted to spend time with. They didn't do group meetings, record podcasts, or plan world domination on Saturdays. Officium Mundi was closed, and they still hadn't found or remembered any of the other entrances. The Akashic Sewer never opened on days that weren't school days anymore, which was deeply unsettling. And spending time in Clutter Ascent was a relaxing break from everything all on its own. The response team still operated, and that whole affair was ramping up at a rate that James hadn't really been prepared for, but it was ever more and more satisfying. Sometimes they saved lives, and so far they hadn't been caught, though the rumors were building, and it was only a matter of time before it went viral or something, and James just wasn't on call on Saturday. He and Anesh had spent the day just hanging out, talking like they didn't get much of a chance to do these days. They didn't really bother to pretend that they had normal lives separate from the Order and the magical stuff either. They were perfectly happy to gossip about which knights were dating, to go into deep philosophical discussions about the machine intelligence in the basement, to express concern for certain people that they'd noticed having problems, or speculate wildly about other dungeons. They loved planning out what they wanted their future magical home to look like, and they would pause whatever YouTube video they were watching together every 12 seconds to politely insert their own commentary. They'd made dinner together, something vegetarian and so spicy that James had developed heartburn looking at it, and Anesh had declared it perfect. They'd gone on a walk together, grabbed coffee, which made the heartburn worse, but whatever, and watched the brightest stars come out through the spotty clouds overhead. They'd gone home tired and happy. Both of them still missed Alana. There had been no hint of where she was for a while. Neither of them knew what to do, but they weren't giving up hope or assuming she was gone. And then, as they were getting ready for bed, James asked something that caught Anesh off guard while he was brushing his teeth. "Hey, do you mind us being the same person tonight?" James asked nervously, sitting on their bed in a pair of sweatpants. Anesh took a second, and then walked out of the small bathroom connected to the space that he and James shared, drying his hands on the fluffy towel he had wrapped around his waist. "I'm okay with it, sure. I don't know if we've really done that since Alana left. What's going on? You feeling okay?" "Kinda," James said. I wanted to take the potion JP brought back," he said quietly. The one that cures depression. The potion was sitting on the corner of James's desk, right next to his side of the bed. To Anesh, it looked like a small crystal bottle filled with perfectly clear water. To James, it looked like a roiling conglomeration of black scales and terrifyingly endless horizons that writhed in time to the lo-fi cover of an Aerosmith song currently playing from his computer speakers. Yes, Anesh agreed without hesitation. Of course I'll be there for you, he said, without reservations. Do you want to do that now, or do you need a minute? He asked as he pulled on a bathrobe and found an Ethernet cable, sitting down next to James and already clicking the cord into place in his own skulljack, fingers fumbling around the back of his neck. James was breathing a little faster than he wanted, nervous beyond what he wanted to show. Yes, he answered. Yes to which... Oh. Anesh looked at James with concerned eyes, scooting over to pull his boyfriend down to his lap, running warm hands over James's back. Hey, there's no rush, you know. There is, James said. Because the only thing holding me back is being afraid, and I'm kinda fucking sick of it. Let's go. His voice strengthened as he spoke, and he reached back to pull his ponytail out of the way, revealing the skulljack on the back of his neck to Anesh. His boyfriend considered arguing, but there was no point in doing it here when they could discuss it so much more intimately there. So he reached down and connected the two of them. They'd done this before. Two minds reached out through a path that they hadn't always known, awkwardly searching, bumping into each other, sending erratic feelings and thoughts. And then, a kind of singularity as they linked together, sticking in places, folding, falling, flailing, fleeing. They came together more rapidly, both of the minds fully giving themselves to the other, to their own togetherness. Then there was one of them, and they knew, they felt beyond any doubt how much they loved each other when they were apart, how much they trusted each other. All of their doubts and concerns and worries without judgment or fear, all of their small hopes and little joys without anger or disgust. Okay, the new person thought, shared conviction cutting away joint concern. Let's see if this works. A hand that James usually used reached out and grabbed the little crystal bottle, took the stopper out, tilted a head back, and downed the whole thing in one quick go. The collective thought, sourced from that body's taste buds, was, bloody hell, that tastes fucking awful. And then something changed. Something in James's brain, something physical, mental, and spiritual all at once, a noticeable shift to something different. The feelings coming from that body into the shared duality shifted. Less anxiety, less worry, less baseless panic. They smiled together, and something else shifted, and again, changes coming faster and faster, tiny alterations to the operation of James's persona, smoothing out chemical processes in the brain, paving over the jagged edges of old traumas. And then, it was like opening his eyes and seeing that he was standing halfway leaned over a precipice. The sky was the color of dead moments, and the abyss below was the depth of a nightmare. And James was alone, cut off, and something was going wrong. Something inside of him changed. Not a repair, not a patch to something damaged. Part of him shifted into something that was no longer him, and it wasn't anything to do with his depression either. It was something personal, something true. It was an addition to himself. Surface level, yes, but he had not given permission for that to change. It was his. The abyss laughed back at him, a demonic cackle that reminded him that it did not actually care what he wanted. Then it changed something else, dragging James slightly closer to the edge. He wasn't really here, he realized. This place had the feeling of dream logic to it. But it was real, and it was happening, and everything that was him was being overtaken by the thing that he had invited in. Replaced brick by brick with a person that would smile, reassure everyone they were fine, and wear James's skin around like a death mask. James tried to fight back, dragging himself back from the ledge, but the monster wasn't the abyss below. It was the thing that had been standing behind James the whole time, pulling strings, pushing him forward, a little abomination that was oddly physical for the dream space. with a dozen rending limbs like shark's teeth, and eyes that were far, far too human to belong to a monster. There used to be a different monster here, James dully realized, but everything that had been his depression had been cut away and replaced by this thing that used that platform as a stepping stone deeper into his mind. He tried to kill it, and his strikes never landed. The pit and the sky and the creature laughed at him and changed something else. And James was left alone in the darkness, helpless and dying. Up! The voice came from a million miles away, too far to matter. James! Louder this time, still too far, but how did he hear anything? It didn't really matter. He was already gone, too far lost. James, get up! Anesh's words weren't words at all. They were a panicked howl, an impulse to struggle, to resist, to not give in, to stand up and keep fighting, because he was right there, and James just needed to reach out. James opened dream eyes and looked up at the hostile sky, cracked open and rent asunder to make a path for Anesh. His partner, not a person but an indistinct presence, filled the dream space, filled James's mind, holding the thing back but faltering. James gathered every part of him that he had left and reached out, grabbed the offered hand, connected. One shared mind, half operating in a dream, the other half literal. Anesh dumped into James's body a snapshot of James's person, everything that had been cut off inside Anesh when the creature in the bottle had sunk its claws in. James, in unreality, found his strength restored, his form under his own control. He killed the monster easily, paved over the abyss. Together, the two of them cracked the sky and fell backward away from the edge and onto the bed. James let out a panic "Ach!" noise as the cord connecting them pulled taut and jerked out of his skull to trail across the blankets as he and Anesh tumbled away from each other. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, taking deep breaths, afraid to move in case this was still the nightmare-given form. That lasted for about one D&D combat round before Anesh crawled over to him and gave James a panicked shake of the shoulder. You okay? Anesh asked. My neck hurts, James answered. Anesh didn't let go of him. That's not what I meant. James let his eyes focus on his partner's face and saw a terrified expression, tears in his eyes. He mustered all the effort he had and reached up a hand to cup Anesh's cheek. I'm all right, he said. I'm still me. What the bloody hell was that? I think... James looked over at the crystal bottle sitting placidly on his desk. It was, unnervingly, once again full. I think that if you hadn't been there, it would have removed my depression, he said, a grim certainty giving his voice an iron edge. And then the rest of me. And then it would have gotten up. And if the bottle refills, maybe it would have sold it to somebody else. Did JP just try to kill you? Anesh asked, kneeling forward over James's body. I seriously doubt he knew, James said. But this is bad. This is really bad. We're gonna need... Ah, Christ, my skull hurts from the inside. Anesh pulled James into an odd-angled hug. I'm sorry, he said. I had to undo as much as I could, all of it. I don't know if it was enough. Are you still you? Well, I still feel exhausted and worried about everything, James said. He meant it as a joke, but Anesh just started apologizing again. Nope, stop, James cut him off. It's okay. I'm me. I'd rather be me and depressed than fine and dead, okay? You saved me again. Again and again. You always save me, don't you? He pulled Anesh up, smiled into his eyes before kissing him. Thank you. Now, relax. I have to do a thing before bed. What? Anesh worriedly asked as James stole the bathrobe from him. I'm going to go find something with a lock on it and shove this in there. And if we're lucky, it's not going to break out on its own. Oh, so when you said before bed, you meant before nervously falling asleep to Nightmare Town. Anesh, please, James said. It's 2021. We should be used to Nightmare Town by now. Anesh cracked a small smile. I'm putting in a vote tomorrow that we move to Mars. Noted. Now lay down. I'll be back in a minute, and then we can cuddle and have bad dreams together, James told him.